picture this. You arrive at Fisherman's Wharf expecting the San Francisco you have seen in movies and postcards. You imagine fishing boats moving through the fog, wooden docks covered with nets, and fishermen pulling fresh Dungeness crab from the bay. You expect a working waterfront. Instead, you find souvenir stores, chain restaurants, expensive parking, and seafood that may have traveled hundreds of miles before reaching your plate. The fishing nets are still there. The crab pots are still there. The old photographs of fishermen are still hanging on the walls. But much of the real fishing industry is gone. That is why people say Fisherman's Wharf is dead. Not because nobody visits. Tourists still crowd the sidewalks, especially during weekends and holidays. The sea lions still attract cameras. Restaurants still serve chowder inside sourdough bread bowls. But the place no longer feels like the living neighborhood that made it famous. Fisherman's Wharf was never supposed to be a theme park. It began as a real fishing community. Italian immigrants, especially fishermen from Sicily and Genoa, settled near San Francisco Bay during the 19th century. They brought generations of experience working with boats, tides, and the sea. They left the harbor before sunrise and returned with crab, salmon, sardines, shrimp, and other Pacific seafood. The docks were not decorated to appear authentic. They were authentic. The ropes and traps were there because fishermen used them. The smell of seafood came from the day's catch being unloaded from boats. Crabs were cleaned, cooked, and sold close to where they arrived. Restaurants opened around the harbor because people wanted to eat the seafood the fishermen had just caught. There was a direct connection between the ocean, the boat, the kitchen, and the plate. That connection gave the wharf its identity. When visitors ate crab near the pier, they were not simply buying dinner. They were stepping into a working community. They could watch fishermen repair equipment, unload boats, and prepare the catch. Even the famous clam chowder in a sourdough bread bowl grew from real San Francisco traditions. Boudin Bakery began in 1849 and became part of the city's sourdough history. Serving hot chowder inside local bread made sense in a cold, windy waterfront district. It became popular because it belonged to the place. For many years, tourism and fishing existed together. Visitors came, but the boats were still working. Restaurants were often operated by families with direct connections to the harbor. The neighborhood did not need to invent a story. The story was happening every day. Ghirardelli Square also respected the area's history. It opened inside a former chocolate factory rather than replacing the building with something completely artificial. The cannery followed a similar idea, transforming an old canning facility into shops and restaurants. These developments were commercial, but they reused real history. Then in 1990, California sea lions began appearing near Pier 39. The animals discovered empty floating docks after many boats had moved away from the marina. They climbed onto the platforms and refused to leave. They barked, slept, fought for space, and pushed one another into the water. Visitors loved them. The sea lions became one of the most popular attractions in San Francisco because nobody had planned them. They were not part of a show or marketing campaign. They were wild animals doing whatever they wanted. For a while, Fisherman's Wharf had everything. It had local food, working boats, historic buildings, fishing families, waterfront views, and a colony of sea lions. But underneath the tourist crowds, the fishing industry was declining. The change happened slowly. Fishing became more expensive. Fuel prices rose. Regulations increased. Larger industrial operations created competition that smaller fishing boats struggled to survive. Fish populations also changed. Overfishing damaged some species, while environmental conditions became more unpredictable. Dungeness crab, the product most closely connected to Fisherman's Wharf, became especially vulnerable. Harmful algal blooms sometimes produced domoic acid, a toxin that could make crabs unsafe to eat. This caused delays and closures during several commercial crab seasons. For a tourist, a delayed crab season might sound like a small inconvenience. For a fisherman, it could mean losing months of income. Some fishing families left the industry, others moved their boats. Younger generations chose different careers. Slowly, the working boats disappeared, but the restaurants stayed, the crab sign stayed, the fishing nets stayed, the menus stayed. The wharf continued presenting itself as a working fishing village, even though much of the seafood was no longer caught by boats based there. Crab could arrive from Oregon or Washington. Fish could come through large commercial distributors. Restaurants continued selling the image of local fishing, even when they had little connection to the fishermen working in San Francisco Bay. The appearance survived after the reality changed. Fishing nets became decorations, crab pots became props, old photographs became advertising. The wharf was no longer selling only seafood. It was selling the memory of what it used to be. Then came the prices. San Francisco is one of the most expensive cities in America. Rent, labor, insurance, permits, ingredients, and maintenance all cost more than in many other cities. A bowl of clam chowder and a sourdough bread bowl can cost close to $20. A whole Dungeness crab may cost between $35 and $55. A seafood dinner can easily reach $70 or $100 per person after drinks, tax, and tips. Those prices are not always the result of businesses trying to cheat tourists. Operating a restaurant in San Francisco is expensive, but the real issue is value. Visitors will pay high prices for something special. They will pay for seafood caught by local fishermen. They will pay to eat inside a family restaurant with generations of history. But they feel disappointed when expensive food tastes ordinary. A family might spend $200 on dinner and leave feeling that they paid for the view rather than the meal. Then they discover the rest of San Francisco. In the Mission District, they can eat famous burritos for a fraction of the price. In Chinatown, they find restaurants connected to a living community. In North Beach, they find bakeries, cafes, and Italian restaurants with neighborhood character. At the Ferry Building, they find local farmers, bakers, chefs, and food producers connected to Northern California. The Ferry Building creates an uncomfortable comparison because it is also located on the waterfront. Both destinations offer food, shopping, views, and history. But the Ferry Building feels connected to what San Francisco is today. Fisherman's Wharf often feels like it is selling an old tourist image of the city. One destination continued evolving. The other remained trapped in the past. The difference becomes obvious to returning visitors. On their first trip, they go to Fisherman's Wharf because every travel guide tells them to visit. On their second trip, they usually go somewhere else. The area also became increasingly dominated by chain restaurants and repetitive souvenir stores. Large chains can survive high rent because they have corporate financing and recognizable names. Small independent restaurants have fewer protections. As chains moved in, the wharf began to feel less unique. A visitor could enter a similar restaurant in Orlando, Las Vegas, New York, or Los Angeles and receive almost the same experience. That is the opposite of what made the old Fisherman's Wharf special. The original wharf could only exist in San Francisco because it grew from the bay, the fishermen, the immigrant families, and the city's food traditions. The modern version feels easier to copy. The souvenir stores create the same problem. Many sell nearly identical Golden Gate Bridge magnets, Alcatraz shirts, cable car keychains, hoodies, snow globes, and plastic sea lions. Tourists enjoy souvenirs, but the repetition removes the feeling of discovery. Instead of meeting local artists or independent shop owners, visitors see the same products under different signs. The wharf becomes crowded while feeling strangely empty. Safety concerns also hurt the area's reputation. Stories about car break-ins around San Francisco tourist areas spread online. Rental car companies began warning visitors not to leave bags, luggage, or electronics inside vehicles. Videos of broken windows circulated across social media. Even tourists who never personally experienced crime arrived expecting it. That fear changed how visitors described the city to friends and family. Then the pandemic arrived. Fisherman's Wharf depended heavily on international tourists, tour groups, convention visitors, and families traveling from other states. When travel stopped, the area lost its customers almost overnight. Restaurants became empty, shops closed, hotels lost guests, businesses with high operating costs burned through their savings. Some never reopened. When tourism finally returned, visitors had changed. Many wanted local food, open spaces, and experiences that felt meaningful. They were less interested in crowded tourist traps and generic chain restaurants. The pandemic did not create the wharf's problems, it exposed them. The fishing industry had already declined. The prices were already high. The chains had already arrived. The neighborhood had already lost much of its original character. One attraction still works almost perfectly: the sea lions. They remain popular because they are genuine. They do not perform on command. They do not follow a schedule. They do not try to sell anything. They bark, sleep, fight for space, and return whenever they want. For a few minutes, the wharf feels connected to the wild bay again. But the sea lions cannot fill an entire afternoon. After watching them, visitors walk through Pier 39, look inside a few shops, check restaurant menus, take photographs, and begin asking the same question: what now? Alcatraz remains another major attraction near the wharf. The former prison offers a powerful experience based on real history. Its audio tour includes stories connected to former guards and inmates. Tickets often sell out far in advance. But Alcatraz reveals another uncomfortable truth. One of the best things to do near Fisherman's Wharf is board a ferry and leave it. Locals have understood the problem for years. Most San Francisco residents do not hate Fisherman's Wharf. They simply have no reason to go. They can find better food elsewhere. They can enjoy waterfront views along the Embarcadero. They can visit neighborhood cafes, markets, parks, and restaurants without paying tourist prices. Fisherman's Wharf mainly depends on first-time visitors. The visitor who sees fishing nets and assumes the seafood must be local. The visitor who sees a crab sign and assumes fishing boats are still unloading behind the restaurant. The visitor who sees a bread bowl and assumes it must be the best food in San Francisco. But tourists now have reviews, videos, maps, and recommendations on their phones. They can quickly compare prices and discover where locals actually eat. Fisherman's Wharf did not collapse in one dramatic moment. It was slowly hollowed out. The fishing industry declined. The seafood became disconnected from the harbor. Chain restaurants arrived. Souvenir stores multiplied. Prices rose. Independent businesses disappeared. Safety concerns damaged the city's image. Then the pandemic exposed the entire system. At the same time, the rest of San Francisco kept improving. The neighborhoods offered better food, stronger culture, and experiences that felt more real. Fisherman's Wharf remained trapped inside an old version of what tourists expected San Francisco to be. Still, the district is not beyond saving. Its waterfront location is extraordinary. Its fishing families have stories worth preserving. Its sourdough tradition is real. Its historic buildings remain standing. The sea lions still attract visitors. But saving Fisherman's Wharf would require more than new signs, fresh paint, or another chain restaurant. It would require reconnecting the neighborhood to the bay. That could mean affordable space for working fishermen, local seafood markets, independent restaurants, maritime museums, boat builders, and Bay Area artists. It could mean telling the history of the fishing families through photographs, restored boats, exhibitions, and guided tours. It could mean showing visitors where their seafood came from and who caught it. Fewer generic souvenirs, more local businesses, fewer fake fishing props, more real waterfront activity. Fisherman's Wharf does not need to return to the past, but it must stop pretending the past never disappeared. Until that happens, people will continue arriving because travel guides tell them they should. They will eat the chowder, they will photograph the sea lions, they will buy a magnet, then they will leave without any strong desire to return. That is why Fisherman's Wharf feels dead. Not because every store is closed, not because every restaurant is empty, not because tourists have completely disappeared. It feels dead because the living community that created it has been replaced by businesses selling the image of that community. The real fishing boats disappeared, but the fishing signs remained. The seafood became less local, but the menus continued telling the same story. The neighborhood lost its original purpose, but preserved its costume, and that may be the saddest fate that can happen to a famous place. It does not vanish, it does not become a ruin. The lights remain on, the tourists continue arriving, but the soul slowly fades until the place becomes a souvenir of itself. Fisherman's Wharf is still there, but unless San Francisco reconnects it to the people, food, history, and working waterfront that made it famous, it will remain a place millions of visitors are told they should see once. And only once.